Expert insight, clear analysis, strategy in action. Welcome to the CEO to CEO podcast, featuring the world's top CEOs. The podcast will welcome honest conversations meant to challenge traditional ways of thinking from fellow global industry leaders. This podcast will also explore the intricate world of M&A from an insider's perspective. M&A is a big deal, one in which you can drive the future of your business, your industry, and even the trajectory of the marketplace. This podcast is hosted by Kevin Campbell, CEO of Syniti. Syniti is a global enterprise data solution provider specializing in data operations and data transformation. Kevin is a global champion in data and has served as the former Group Chief Executive Officer at Accenture and COO of Oscar Insurance Corporation. This week, Kevin sits down with Andy Zimmerman, president of Frog Design, one of the world's leading design and innovation firms. Prior to joining Frog, he was the managing director of the Accenture New Businesses, where he launched the Accenture Interactive and Mobility businesses that make up the majority of what is now Accenture Digital. Previously, he was a managing director at idealab, one of the first and most successful incubators and global managing partners for ebusiness at PwC.
Welcome to this week's CEO to CEO podcast. Today, we're delighted to have on with us Andy Zimmerman. Andy's the CEO of Frog Design. So we'll explore with him what a design company's like. And Andy's done a lot of other interesting things in his life, including being an author. So we'll talk about all that. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Great to be here.
How about if you start out with just giving us a little quick overview of your career?
Just briefly, I started out life wanting to be the great American writer, novelist. As you mentioned, Kevin, I was a little late getting my first novel out last year, but then I fell into business and ended up a chunk of my career was at PwC Consulting, ultimately running the ebusiness practice back in the dot-com era. Then I got involved with venture capital, was a managing director at idealab, one of the leading incubator VCs at that time. And ran a small company, a public company for a while, and then spent 10 years at Accenture, where you and I crossed paths, doing everything from running the comms practice to really being involved in starting up Accenture Digital. And then basically have been at Frog for the last 6 years as their CEO.
And so why don't you tell us what attracted you to Frog?
Well, Frog is one of the iconic design firms in the world. It's actually more than 50 years old. Its founder, Hartmut Essinger, was a German designer who was famous for example, working with Steve Jobs in the early Apple years, having worked with Steve to design the Apple IIc, the Apple Macintosh, Lisa, followed him to Nextcube and designed Nextcube. The actual software design, the Snow White design language, all of that was Frog and Hartmut. But since then, we're kind of famous for work we've done in areas like more recently Sirius XM, the newest version of that, the newest version of HBO Max, the home lighting system for IKEA. I mean, it just goes on and on. And so a lot of work for an amusement park company I cannot name, but redesigning the entire experience at the largest amusement park in the world. And so it's a lot of fun to kind of be exposed to the way in which designers think and the kind of work that we get to do. It tends to be kind of state of the art, a little bit bleeding edge, if not a lot bleeding edge. And I like to say that, I get to see the future before it appears in the real world by being running Frog.
That's awesome. That's got to be exciting. So how does Frog attract clients and get work? Sounds like an iconic brand, been around for a long time. How do they get new clients?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're kind of most of our work is inbound. Most of the time, it's people calling us and asking us to propose to do something, and it really is because of the power of the brand. They either have known someone who's used us, or they've used us at another company. On the designer side, most designers study the work Frog in school. I mean, most they study the Snow White design language, which probably was the first and and most, successful design language in design history, things like that. So some of the kids that come into Frog tell me, God, I can't believe I'm working at Frog, studied when I was in school. So I think in the design community in particular, not necessarily in the greater business community, Frog is, incredibly well known. I think in places like Silicon Valley, because of the history we've had with Jobs and Michael Dell and others, where Frog is very well known as well in the technology space.
So describe to us, I know you guys have labs. Describe to us kind of how you work with clients, because I think it's fascinating based on what we've talked about before.
We're sort of a studio-based business. So our Frogs, and we can talk about the pandemic, but before the pandemic, our Frogs would work in studios. We're in 14 studios in 10 different countries. And these studios are set up purposely to encourage flow of people. I mean, there's not a lot of standing workstations and so forth. There's a lot of rooms. The rooms actually change. Most of the rooms have moving walls and are designed around particular programs we're working on. But so they're very flexible and they're physical. Meaning, for example, we were hired by a beverage company recently to come up with a craft beer retail concept. And we actually built the store in the studio in New York. I mean, a prototype of the store, and then had real people come in and walk through it. And we looked at the flows and interviewed them and kept diaries. So it's a very dynamic place where one day you might see a robot like fighting another robot. And then the other day you might see a craft bar where a bunch of people seem to be drinking beer and having a good time. And that's sort of the environment at Frog.
How do you decide as CEO what stuff you get involved in? Is it mostly on the sales side, or do you stay close to some of the big accounts? How do you figure out your day?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just I happen to have someone working with me, the COO, who's very strong, and so operationally I can rely on him to deal with a lot of the things around finance and ops. My focus tends to be on clients and sales and relationships. People, designers, creatives require a lot of attention, a lot of care and feeding. What motivates them is quite different than the type A kind of traditional consultant. And one of the things that motivates them is that they feel they're getting attention, they're being listened to, even at my level. And then I'm out there with the press and the media and speaking and so forth, because we do, our brand is about, forecast, future casting and the future and trends and so forth. So that's where I'm spending most of my time, sort of, media, speaking, key client relationships, and then taking care of our people.
What are some of the favorite projects? You've mentioned some, but are some other ones that come to mind that you guys have done so far or most recently?
Yeah, we're working on one today that happens to be a favorite of mine. I can't really say the name of the company. It's a stealth mode startup, but it's very backed by some, major investors. And it's a application to train puppies. So this is particularly germane to me because my partner and I just acquired a puppy about 2 months ago, and it's not ready, the application. So we're training it. We're learning the hard way. But what it is, a combination of things. So it's an Internet of Things type of application because there are sensors around the home that sense both movement and audio for the dog. Then all that data goes up into the cloud, and there's an AI application running up there that analyzes that motion and audio, and then feeds back on a mobile app back to the owner and prompts the owner for what to do. And so it helps the owner train the puppy. So, it utilizes a lot of kind of leading edge technology in terms of sensors and AI. It also solves a very human and real need. And of course, it's going to do really well on our website, kind of similar to those ads you see for the puppies in the animal shelters on the news.
Right.
We'll definitely play this one up when we can go public with it, because it will tug at the hearts of people everywhere when they see these little puppies being trained.
Well, you'll have to let me know when it's available, because I should be an early subscriber, because I've got a 14-year-old and a 6-year-old Labradoodles, and they have tried many training programs. And let's say, they're saying they're trying to train me, and I haven't succeeded. So,
well, I'll put you on the waiting list.
All right. Well, tell us about COVID and how has COVID changed your business? As you said, you've got studios all over the place, and that has to have had a pretty big change.
Yeah, no, it was fairly dramatic. We have a studio in Shanghai, and that's where it started, of course. And that was the first studio to close. That also was the first studio to reopen, interestingly. But as we kind of had the COVID going around the world into Europe and then North America, we began to close our studios. Then the other thing, one of the things we do is a lot of design research, and we do it in the field. So when we do research, we'll go to people's homes. We'll do photo diaries. We'll we'll do observation interviews and so forth. All of that, of course, couldn't happen with COVID. So we lost our ability to do in-person design research. We lost our ability to be in studios to work. And frankly, when this started happening, if you had asked me what the impact it would have on our business, I would have thought maybe it would cut it in half, because I just felt like that's what we do. Everything we do requires people being together. What's happened is we've learned that you can do a lot through remote working using tools like Teams and Miro and so forth. And actually, we was a setback early on, of course, when just everyone was shocked by COVID. Since then, we now grow, actually having some healthy growth and hiring people. And and about half of our studios are partially open, half are pretty much completely closed. We have done a survey of clients and employees, and what we found was clients feel the quality of work is the same as before. What they miss is more the social human touch aspect of the relationship. They miss the dinners, they miss the sidebar conversations, but they think the quality's there. The productivity is up because people don't have as many distractions. And then depending on the demographic of the employee, older employees and of course mothers or employees with families and so forth actually are quite positive about the flexibility they now have. Younger employees actually really do want to come in the studios, because part of becoming part of Frog is that experience. But business wise, it's been very, like I think a lot of people, it's been very eye-opening, and we're definitely rethinking the role of the studio going forward. It may become more of the new offsite, type of thing, using it for marketing and offsite purposes, a little less for working purposes. Although, we do plan to reopen studios. We just probably won't need as much space going forward.
How has it been to attract and hire people, especially when they're, it's such a creative atmosphere that you're looking for, creative spark, juice in COVID? Have you been able to hire good people?
Yeah, I mean, we're I think since the beginning of the year, I think we've hired about 50 people, which is a lot for a company the size of Frog, partly because we are, business is booming. We're pretty happy with the results we're getting. I mean, we have a fairly rigorous approach. And so we do a lot of kind of interactive types of exercises as part of the interviews, where we can, which we do in person, but now we're doing with tools like Miro and so forth. And we're finding that, and then we go out of our way to using different rituals, and we call them, to kind of welcome and onboard people, in a situation where they've never been to the studio.
Right.
And so we have this sort of Frog Me thing where you give a presentation to people in your studio when you first come on board. You have a mentor, kind of the person that kind of moves you around the organization, and so forth. So I think there's no doubt people really do miss the human touch part of it, but we have been able to successfully attract and retain people. Our attrition's down, from previously, I think, because people's just a little bit more reluctant to explore the market when they're happy where they are. But yeah, we've been pretty lucky on the recruiting side.
You talked about organic growth. Do you guys do acquisitions too, or is your main strategy, if you look forward, 2-3 years, is most of it organic growth?
Historically, Frog has pretty much entirely been organic growth. We bought a little outfit in Milan like 20-30 years ago, and a little digital group in Austin, which was great because it became, our Austin studio, which is one of our largest. And of course, with the market there, it's, perfectly positioned. But those were very modest. It's all been organic. I mean, we were acquired by Capgemini last year, And I think that there are related services kind of adjacent to Frog, where there might be opportunities to acquire companies in related and adjacent areas. But up to now, our growth has been organic.
Let's talk just quickly about some of the stuff you guys do to give back. So I know there's some not-for-profit projects that you do, and I've had a chance to look at some of those. So are there a couple that come to mind that in the give back category of things that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think the way we give back is we'll do work for NGOs and so forth. Frankly, at rates and that barely cover our costs type of thing. So and some of the larger programs we did recently, we did one pretty famous one for the UN around crisis management. So we developed a platform that if there is a natural or man-made crisis, whether it's war, earthquakes, whatever it is, there's a platform now they use. So all the various stakeholders, all the health services organizations, the governmental organizations, so forth, can access this platform and work off of a common sort of moment of truth as to what's going on the ground. And that's been activated and used very successfully. So that's us helping people in crisis. One we did recently, sponsored by a Nike brand, was a work we did around teaching girls to dance in Northern Africa countries. Traditionally, they tend to be kept in their huts until they're ready to be married. That's sort of the culture. And so the kind of request was, how do we get them to begin to socialize prior to getting married? How do we get them to socialize with each other? And we used dance as a way of bringing them together and introducing them to socialization outside of their family, basically, but short of starting a family, which may seem like an obvious thing in Western culture, but was something in the African Muslim culture, something that was new. And we had to navigate between the cultural sort of constraints you're dealing with and the desire to kind of give young women, teenage girls, an opportunity to experience a social life.
That's great. And we mentioned before that you told us that you always wanted to be an author, and this year you finally are. So what was the inspiration to finally get your book done, and what's it based on?
Yeah, so the book, and I don't have no problem plugging it, Journey by Andrew Zimmerman. It's on Amazon and everywhere else. But no, what happened was it really, it's not a memoir, it's a novel, but it was inspired by some personal events in my life. In fact, while I was at Accenture, I think probably, Kevin, you were there at the same time, I went through an experience very almost accidentally, now I would say synchronistically. I went through an experience where I was introduced to a little village in England called Glastonbury, best known for the music festival, but also a place of rich history and mythology, and now a bit of a new age sort of gathering place. And there I had a soul reading with an individual that just opened me up and it kind of awakened me and kind of put me in touch with myself. And that led to a series of events and a bit of a journey in my life in terms of getting to know my younger self and getting to come up with a new way of dealing with business challenges and personal challenges, and inspired me to write the book. So while it is fiction, it is about a character who's kind of you would recognize, Kevin, it's called Ascendant in the novel, not a very well disguised, term for Accenture, but it's a hot, hard driving guy trying to get the top at a big place like Accenture, and he kind of loses track, of what's important and what's meaningful. And then it kind of both, somewhat humorously and with humor and sometimes with real drama, it paints a picture of someone trying to navigate the spiritual and the business world. And he has to make some decisions at the end of the book. And there's 2 novels to follow. It's a trilogy. So this is just the first one.
Are you working on the second one now?
Yeah, I'm about 2/3 through the first draft. We're supposed to try to get it out in March, which was the first anniversary of the novel of Journey, but it's going to be later, probably late summer now. But yeah, no, I'm pretty far along.
What advice would you have for any CEOs out there that want to write a novel?
Well, probably I wouldn't try to do it. I'd
Don't,
say
right?
I'd say only CEOs that travel a lot to Europe and Asia should do it, because what I found my most productive time for writing were on long flights, 5, 6 hour flights, or of course Asia even more. I got a lot of chapters written on these long flights where you don't have the same, you don't have the phone connectivity anyway, the audio.
Right.
But it was hard. It took me 8 years, so for the first one. So, it wasn't like I wrote it in the weekend or anything.
Yeah. No, it's quite you said a labor of love though, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I had to do it. The one thing I would say is that what the most fulfilling thing for me is, and it's done reasonably well. It did make #1 bestseller for metaphysical fiction when it first came out on Amazon. But sometimes I get a note from someone. I don't know who they are, and they get to me through LinkedIn or something, and they say, "Gee, I read your book, and I've kind of opened up. I'm sort of opening up myself, and I just want to thank you, a type of thing." And particularly when it comes from a perfect stranger. If it comes from friends and family, it's one thing, but somebody I've never met and probably never will met, that actually makes me feel a little bit like I'm giving back a bit to the world, and just makes me feel really good.
That's awesome. Hey, 2 questions I like to ask all of the guests. Who have been your mentors and what have you learned from them?
Well, my biggest mentor in life, I won't say his name because I don't want to, but he was a fellow that actually I met when I first joined what was then Coopers and Lybrand, and he ran HR for the New York office, and there was an issue, a positive issue, but an issue where he intervened and kind of made it right for me, and we just struck up a relationship. And I worked for him at one point in my career. He was involved with idealab. He was a very senior person at AT&T, and a big investor, very successful investor, and so forth. And even to this day, I'm out on the West Coast now, and he and his wife live in Carmel, and we play golf, and I see him, every month or two. And he's just always been my mentor, my advisor, sort of, my friend.
And what's the best career advice you've ever gotten?
From this individual, actually sort of in the midst of the experience I was having, which I kind of, portray a bit in the novel, the awakening and beginning to think, what's it all about? I was walking in his backyard. He has a huge, wonderful grounds to his house, and we're in the gardens. And I was talking about, whether I should try to get this job or that job or this promote. I'm just rattling on about stuff. And I said, "What do you think?" And he says, "I think you need to stop and you need to smell the roses." And that was the best advice I ever got.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we know we can get your book on Amazon. If people want to talk to you about Frog Design and get your services, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, my email, I guess, is best. It's andrew.zimmerman@frogdesign.com. You can just go to the website. If you just Google Frog or whatever, you'll get to the website, and you can just do a query and just mention my name that you want to talk to me, is another way to do it. Or on LinkedIn. I do look at my messages on LinkedIn. So those will be 3 ways to reach me.
Andy Zimmerman, thanks for being on, CEO of Frog Design. Thanks for being on. We really enjoyed. And to the audience, tune in next week when we'll have another CEO talk about their journey in their life.
Thank you for joining the CEO to CEO podcast. Join us next time as we uncover data strategies to support mergers, acquisitions, divestitures with the world's top CEOs.